Welcome everyone. Tonight we are not in the Yiboneh Beit Midrash, but this is still a Yiboneh production, and we welcome everyone home to Torah. Those that have joined us live, which Baruch Hashem, we have a nice group. We have a few newcomers, and for those that are watching for the first time, we usually discuss the Kli Yakar. That's Shlomo Ephraim of Lunchitz, who lived over 400 years ago and gave us such a treasure. Insights into the Parshat HaShavua. Okay, so basically we're going to discuss something entirely different tonight. We're going to focus on Pesach, and we're going to be using the Sefat Emes. Now before we do that, I want to mention that I want to pray for everyone's health, right? That God should give us all strength, help our immune system, but most of all, no matter what happens, we have to be nice to each other, we have to help each other, we have to do chesed. Right? For whatever reason Hashem has sent this plague, we should all do our own meditation, right? Our own introspection, our own hitbodedut, which is really the concept for quarantining, right? To be alone for a moment and really think about what it is that we could do to make the world a better place. So I pray for everyone's health and as I mentioned, and people who, God forbid, are already ill, that they should have a complete refuah, a complete recovery very soon. And I want to mention about last year's class, I covered a tremendous amount. I covered 11 paragraphs of this Sefat Emes, and in a little over 2 hours. What I plan to do tonight is only 3 paragraphs in 1 hour. So we'll go a lot slower. B'ezrat Hashem, it'll be more, easier to digest. Okay, so that's the goal. The link to last year's class will be down below in the description box that you'll find on the YouTube. I think it's very important to hear it. If you have the stamina for a 2-hour lecture, over 2 hours. But I think it's very important as a background because many of the concepts, or let's say the fundamental concept that we discussed last year was about hachana, preparation, and joy. And these will catapult or turbo boost you into what we call a higher level of consciousness and connection with Hashem. Okay, so you have to listen to that link, to that last year's class, as you don't have to. I'm just suggesting it, okay? If you want to get a better understanding. Okay, so tonight we're going to deal with paragraphs 12, 13, 14, and 15 in the Sefat Emes. So who is this Sefat Emes? And actually I wanted to mention one more thing before we got started. And I wanted to thank all those who contributed to our fundraising campaign. We are processing and delivering person to person. I know this is a very difficult and perhaps risky endeavor, but there are 200 people at this point that we've already committed to and have raised the money to provide meals for Pesach. Okay, so that was a huge endeavor, not in terms of the financial aspect, but in terms of getting volunteers for delivery, because we have to deliver 200 meals in just a short period of time. Now that's just one aspect of the project, and thank God for all the donors. We have overcome the burden of the cost, and we passed our goal, basically. However, I wanted to mention that all the 2 weeks, which is today, it's Rosh Chodesh, right? We just passed Rosh Chodesh. From Rosh Chodesh onwards, wherever I would go to shul, when I go to synagogue, when I'd walk down the streets, people would hand me envelopes to give to poor people. We're talking about financial assistance for the time of the whole week of Pesach. And so not only in shul, but we also, in the past, every year, we've set up what we call Hagalat Kelim next to the mikveh here in Baka, where we had a blowtorch and a big pot of boiling water, and people could bring their cookware, right, to be kashered for Passover. So we've had hundreds of people. We also sold their chametz, right? We dealt with as an agent to sell their chametz. So people would give money. We collected thousands and thousands of shekels over the last, those years during this 2-week period. we won't be running into anybody. So nobody will see me and say, I'm getting phone calls and I'm getting emails of people who are interested in donating, but I want to let you know that you can still contribute. That's my key here. You can still contribute and we can still help all these families. Even though we surpassed the goal for the 200 meals, any additional money will go to needy families, needy people in need of assistance, and believe me, right now there's plenty of them. So we're not asking for a lot of money from any one person. Of course, if anybody wants to donate whatever they can, but even the smallest amount, it is an obligation for a Jew anyway to help another Jew, especially during the holiday. There was a tax, it's in the Shulchan Aruch, it was a head tax that everyone had to contribute something in terms of wheat or matzah, so that people can have enough money for matzah and wine to fulfill their obligation, and of course meat for the holiday as well. So if you go to the link, it will also be provided down below in the description box, and you see that we surpassed the amount. Don't worry, it will still be used wisely and for needy families, for kimcha de pischa, what we call the wheat that is used to make the matzahs for Passover. Okay, so now I wanted to tell you about the Sfas Emes. Okay, a great Torah scholar. He was one of the Admor, one of the greatest Rabbanim of it's over a century ago. He died in 1905, born in 1847. His name is Rav Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter, and he was the Rebbe of the Gerer Hasidim. Okay, so this is in Poland, in Europe. And great dynasty. I mean, what they have done since the Holocaust, many unfortunate people had passed on, were killed, murdered in Germany, in Europe, in Poland. Nevertheless, they have I don't know if it's the most populous, but one of the largest Hasidic groups around today. And with that, it's very Kabbalistic and mystical, so if you can handle it. Now, we also use text. This type of class is a text-based class, so we hope that you can all appreciate that, and we'll go slow, and we'll learn a little bit of Hebrew on the way. Okay, so the first paragraph, which is really paragraph 12, but on the source sheets it's number 1. So the Sfas Emes says like this: Al yedei hakdamat ha'geula ledorot harishonim yecholim hadoros she'al chareihem lavo legeula. It's a very important concept. I will translate as I go along, which is usually why it takes so long, but hopefully we learn some Hebrew. That it was through this initiation, through this pushing forward, through the early redemption that happened to the first generation, which we're talking about leaving Egypt, then all later generations were able to follow suit and come to a redemption as well. So I don't know the word to use. Let's say it's like a big breakthrough, right? In science, when there's a breakthrough, it lays a path for all future breakthroughs, right? All future inventions are based on one fantastic idea. Right, so we're like, you have a path that's very hard to maneuver, but after many cars have gone down that path, it makes it much easier. Obviously, we're not talking about an asphalted road, but a path that has obstacles. Once the obstacles are removed, it makes it much easier for everyone else. So it was like a blueprint. Basically, what happened to our forefathers, okay, is somehow, I don't want to give too much away at this point, but it's like in our DNA, and the path has been forged, okay? So that's the idea here. So what do we read in our Haggadah? We say like these: if God had not brought us out, I should say our Avosenu Mitzrayim, had not brought our forefathers out from Egypt, Harei anu, you know what? Behold, we, Ubnei Benenu, not only us, but our children and our grandchildren, Mishubadim Hainu Leparo B'Mitzrayim. We would still be slaves. We would still be indebted. We would still be subjugated to Pharaoh. Had they not left, had our forefathers not left, we would still be there. Now, does that really make any sense? A lot of things could have happened into, how many years is it? 3,300 plus years. That's a strong statement. We're making this statement. Okay, so that's part of the Haggadah, and we're going to discuss this. So the first thing he says, Ha'inyan hu al pi ma shekatuv b'Medrash Shmos. In the holy writings of the Midrash Shmot, there's a pasuk. He brings down the pasuk. You can find this in Proverbs 13:24. It says like this. It's the last part. V'havo shicharu musar, which means, well, let's read the verse from the beginning. He who holds back his rod who holds back his rod, he doesn't discipline his own child properly, hates his son. Okay, it's very important. You love your child, you need to discipline them. And it's very hard. Parents love their children, I hope, right? They love them, but you know what? To be a good parent means you have to have some type of discipline. And of course, the Jewish people, in relation to Hashem, we are God's son. And we're not only God's son, we're his firstborn son. Okay, so the pasuk in Proverbs, which King Solomon authored, he who holds back his rod hates his son, but, this is the important part, but he who loves him disciplines him early. Now we're getting into this idea. Remember we mentioned that the early part of this, what we're going to talk about as an exile and the redemption. The redemption is only because of the exile. So the exile is part of what we call, I don't like the word punishment, but in this context we understand there is some kind of discipline. That's a better word. There's some kind of disciplinary activity going on in why we need to go down to Egypt. So that's how he's comparing it to the last part. The one who really loves his son will discipline him, as the word says, shicharu, right? Shachar says early in the morning. We daven, we pray. It's called the morning prayer. He'll discipline him early. Why? Ki avosenu hayu anashim gedolim. Our forefathers were great men, and we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They were great men, and the people who lived in Egypt. Shayu bekochan lisbo galus mitzrayim. They were able to endure this exile in Egypt. Shu'av lekol hamachiot. Now we talk about the four different kingdoms that we're going to experience exile through, right? We start with Babylon, and then Persia, and then Greek, and then Rome, which we're presently in. Well, guess what? Usually Egypt's not even counted amongst those four. It's like a paradigm. It's the father of all, or as they say, the mother of all wars. This was the mother of all exiles, but he uses the word father, and I think he's using the father for a very specific reason, because we're talking about a father disciplining his son. Even Assyria in the Tanakh is called the rod of God. Okay, so Egypt was the rod of God, right? It was God's using them to discipline us. Now, our forefathers were great, and they were able to what? Lisbol. Lisbol is like from the word savlanut, right? Savlanut, patience. It really means to carry on your shoulder, right? You're able to endure. The gullus of Egypt, shu'av l'kol hamachiot. Therefore, lechein heviu Kadosh Baruch Hu bezman karov la'avos shehoya od lochit shel ha'avos behem. Now this is a very difficult concept to try to convey, but I'll try. Therefore, what Hashem did was he moves time, right? He moved the time, or he brought close the time for our forefathers that there should be this lach luchit. Lach luchit is moisture, but here I think it means, how did I translate it? Vitality, life itself. Of our forefathers that is now within us. Now you could translate this in different ways. I think it means metaphysically. It's not just the DNA, it's not just the physical, but it's the spiritual wherewithal that we were able to, because they were able to lisbol, endure, so that gives us the ability also to endure. V'dor shel achreihem Lo haya biyecholotam lavo legeula, and the latter generations, like us or anybody that came after them, we're talking about 3,300 years of history. We did not have or we wouldn't have had the ability to endure had it not been for them paving the way, using this as a breakthrough, that it is now in the spiritual DNA. Because they were able to do it, we're able to do it. And I'm not talking psychologically. I'm saying they were able to do it and they paved the way, therefore we can also sustain ourselves and endure the exiles that would come upon us as well. And then we say in the Haggadah, Vihi sha'amda lavoseinu v'lanu. Okay, I'm not going to sing it. I'm going to save everyone. Shelo echad bilvad amar aleinu lekalotenu. So God promised that He had stood. This is a promise that God had stood by our ancestors and for us. That it's not just one alone that would come up against us to destroy us. Ela shekol dor v'dor, but every single generation. Oimdim aleinu lekalotenu, they would come against us to try to wipe us out. The Kadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam, but Hashem saves us from their hand. Let me just read the actual translation I have here. It is this promise that has stood by our ancestors and for us, and this is what we say in the Haggadah on Pesach night. More than one enemy has risen against us to destroy us. Rather, in every generation they rise against us to annihilate us. The Holy One, blessed be He, whoever saves us from their hand. Okay. So the Sfas Emes continues and says, Hu hagalut mitzrayim v'hagula. This is referring to the original promise, right? That God's going to stand by us. It happened when? It happened in Egypt, and it also refers to that redemption. Kol zeh haya hachana, but all this serves as preparation. We discussed this idea. If you want to read more about what the Sfas Emes has to say about preparation, go to last year's class. But this serves as a preparation, l'kol dor v'dor, for every single generation from that point onwards. She'oimdim aleinu, that the promise would stand up for us, that Hashem would stand up for us against our enemies. L'chein anu smechim, this is very important, therefore we're actually happy. Can you imagine we're actually happy for what? For the exile of Egypt? Oh my gosh, we really have to get this into our system. Had it not been for the exile, of course we wouldn't have been redeemed. But we're not even thinking about the redemption. We're thinking about the earlier part. Now, if we're talking about what we began to speak about in this paragraph, that there is a musar, that there is a discipline, we're going to become better people. Why are the Jews compared to olives? Why are we compared to grapes? Right? Because the best comes from what? From squeezing them. Okay? So I know this is a very difficult thing for many people to understand. But the truth is, even today, God forbid, I mean, we have a pandemic, and you hear the rabbis, and they're speaking about what is going to be after this. Are we going to really learn our lesson? Are we going to meditate and contemplate while we're alone, while we have the opportunity? Are we going to become better people because of this? We're being squeezed, right? I mean, we're being put in uncomfortable situations for most of us. Some people are actually probably enjoying not being around people and maybe being left, laid off. But some people are working from home under uncomfortable situations. Maybe they're experiencing financial stress. There's all kinds of stress. So hopefully, and I think this is the lesson. I know I'm laughing, but I'm laughing because it's so point on. It's like you couldn't get anything better than this. God's talking to us. Really, we have to understand that when this is like an exile. This is like an exile. We're out of our shuls. We're no longer able to pray in the synagogues. And from wherever you are, you're in the same position. You're no longer, unless you're a doctor or a healthcare professional or a truck driver, you're probably not in the same environment that you're used to. So this causes quite a lot of stress, perhaps, as I mentioned. And therefore, now he continues and says, "V'chein oichlin maror." And not only are we thankful or happy about this galus Mitzrayim, about the exile of Egypt, but also for the eating of the maror, the bitter herbs. We're going to eat the bitter herbs, b'simcha, zecha la'avdus shechol zeh haya latavotenu. That all of the subjugation, all of the servitude, all of the hard labor and work, I'm going to say it was all for our benefit. It was all for our good. And that is, again, a very hard pill to swallow. But a spiritually mature person, and I hope we can all grow to that point, where we understand what he's saying. The Sfas Emes is telling us that we should get to this point. When it be spiritually mature, we get to the point that we understand that this was all ultimately for our benefit. Okay, so that's paragraph 1 for tonight. Okay, so now we're going to go into the second paragraph, and it goes like this. That he says, Ikur HaGeula, the prime or the significant essence of the redemption, Lihiyot Nimshachim Acher Maisa Avos. It follows, it's drawn out as a result of the actions of our forefathers. Now, what does it mean, the actions? The behaviors, the characteristics, whatever it is that they did, somehow paved the way towards this redemption. Okay? So there's a medrash that brings a verse. The verse you can find in Exodus 12:22. Now, it's really going to be the latter part of this verse, but we'll look at the whole verse. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop. So the Hebrew word is ulekachtem agudat ezov. Actually, the Medrash brings down the first part. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and immerse it in the blood that's in the basin. Now you're going to use this hyssop. Hyssop is a branch from a low-lying bush, and you're going to dip it in the blood, and you're going to put it on the what? On the lintel and on the mezuzah, meaning on the doorpost of your house. And you shall extend it to the lintel and to the two doorposts, the blood that is in the basin, and you shall not go out, any man, from the entrance of his house until morning. Again, it's very interesting because a lot of people are comparing the virus, the COVID virus, to the idea of the necessity to stay in the house. And it's true. There is a connection which we're not going to go into tonight, but we'll talk about the verse and the way the Sfas Emes brings down this medrash. So the first thing he brings down, it says, you shall bring a bunch of hyssop. Now, I mentioned that it's a low-lying bush. So he says, what's God saying? He says, Ani oseh etchem aguda la'atzmi. God is saying, I'm making you bound like a aguda, like a bunch of twigs all together for myself. I'm taking you as not a bouquet, but I'm taking all the branches and I'm binding them together. For me, he says, even though afal pi sh'atem shvelim, even though you are very lowly. Now, I'm not sure if this is a negative comment, because he says afal pi, because we are supposed to be meek and we are supposed to be humble. But I think just in respect to Hashem, obviously He's so great, and we are so distant from Him when we're so small. But the reason He's going to take us, even though we're so small, is b'schut avos, is because of the merit of our forefathers. This is a very persistent theme throughout Judaism, that we don't look at our actions as being worthy. Okay? Even if we're the greatest tzaddikim, right? Even if we're trying our damnedest, our hardest to be righteous, we know that we fall short, and that on a certain extent, it's a big discussion in the Gemara, how much of the fact that our forefathers were tremendously righteous. They were so righteous that it's in their merit. Remember, God promised Abraham, and He's not going to let Abraham down. He promised Jacob, Isaac and Jacob. So He promised them, and He's going to fulfill His promise because of them and because of their righteousness, not because of our righteousness. And you can read that throughout Daniel, and the book of Daniel, and how he felt about the situation as well. Okay, so that's the first statement he makes. And then that's based on the Medrash. Now he says, Dihine zehaya ikar ha'geula lihiyot nimshachim acher mais avos. This is the prime, this is the paradigm, this is the essence of the redemption that is what? That is drawing forth from our forefathers. And not just from them, but their actions, the actions themselves, like I said, their behaviors or characteristics. Ki be'emet habanim nimshachim acher mais avoteim. Because the truth is, children follow after their parents. They do. You know, there's characteristics that are very, look, you know, you don't have to think that much about it, right? You can see somebody walking down the street and say, I know that walk. and it's the same walk as his father, or her mother, right? There are characteristics without thinking of them. It's a part of our DNA, and the truth is, if they're bad characteristics, we have to work on them and change them around, okay? Because I don't want to get into this whole idea of reincarnation and being punished for the sins of parents and not being punished for the sins of parents. That's a whole nother class in itself. But just the fact that it's so easy to fall in the same either rut or hopefully the positive, that our parents were such righteous people and such caring and worked on their character, that Baruch Hashem, we were brought up in such a beautiful home that it was not, what's the word they use today when a home is dysfunctional? So when it's totally not dysfunctional, a very healthy environment. Can you imagine the children that grow up in such a healthy environment? Hopefully, B'ezrat Hashem, they continue in the actions of their forefathers. So that's what we're talking about here. However, the Sfas Emes says, Ach, shenit arvu begoyim, when we became mixed in with the non-Jews. Now, just keep this in mind. When Joseph's brothers came down to Egypt, he says to them, as advice, take my advice. We must be ghettoized. We must be secluded. We must be separate from the non-Jews. These Egyptians are not healthy to be around, and we don't want to marry them. That's the last thing we need to do. So we want to be away, far away from them. So when Pharaoh asks you, what is your occupation? He says, tell them you are shepherds. Why does he tell them to make sure to tell Pharaoh you're shepherds? Because the sheep was actually the idol, the deity of Egypt, and to be a shepherd is an abomination. And the verse continues, not only to tell them that you're shepherds, but he says because it's an abomination in the eyes of the Egyptians. Okay, so basically this is a way to separate yourselves. So the Sfas Emes mentioned, however, when we became mixed in with the Gentiles, l'chein nifrad hadvekos el hasharesh. You know what happens? Unravels the intimate relationship we have with God. I'm just reading the words, okay? There's a forbidden nature of a Jew to marry outside to non-Jews, unless, of course, they're righteous Gentiles. When then it's a mitzvah. It's a great opportunity. However, if they're not Jewish, it's forbidden. Now, again, the statement was, however, if we became mixed in with, we did become mixed in with the Goyim, and that would unravel this devekus, this clinging to the root which is Hashem. And what happens is that the redemption would bring us back to becoming one unit again. So being the unit is the ideal. Going outside and giving up your Judaism and intermingling or marrying non-Jews is unraveling that bouquet, that bunch of hyssop that God says, I did it for myself. I made you a bundle for myself. Liot navdilin mit arvus. And what happens when we are redeemed? We're separated from that mixture. We're again, as the Torah even says, that we are a nation that dwells alone. We have to dwell separately. Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting that our verse in Exodus chapter 12:22, when God told Moses to take the hyssop and rub it on the doorpost, he first mentions to put on the doorpost first and then on the lintel, and that was the honor of Aaron and Moses, who are the amudim, and God is on top. God puts himself last, but he's giving honor to the leaders of the Jewish people. But when Moses turns around and tells the Jews in this chapter, as we mentioned in Pasuk chapter 12 verse 22, Moses changes it. He changes it and he says, put on the lintel first, because God comes first. It's for the sake of God. Okay, we discussed this a few weeks ago with Shabbos, and that's a very important concept. Okay, without getting too distracted, we just mentioned that the idea is to reach and extend all the way to the mishkof, which is the lintel on top, and the mezuzahs on the side, meaning the doorpost. Just as the Sfas Emes had written in a different place. Now this is very important. A person is obligated. Ready for this? This is when I was in Texas, I mentioned this when I was in the shul, and I was amazed how many people had not heard about it, and they were fascinated by this idea. Chayev Adam Lomer, Masai Yegiyu Mase Lamase Avosai Avraham Yitzchak V'Yaakov. A person is obligated. At least here, he doesn't mention a Jew, but obviously, we all must say this. When am I going to reach? When are my actions going to reach the same actions, the same character, the same values that our forefathers held Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? I mean, that's a huge leap. Why can't I just be me? And I have a low bar, and no. I come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you want to graft yourself in on whatever level as a full-fledged convert or as a Ben Noach who understands the Torah is the instructions for living, and you're going to learn the same instructions that God wants all human beings to know, to acquire chesed, acquire positive traits. Right? I was interviewed. It's going to be written up. Are non-Jews obligated to not speak Lashon Hara? And the person who interviewed me, I'm not sure what they heard before. I know the Rabbi Kessin spoke about it, so I think what she was actually doing was writing something about him. But she wanted to know are non-Jews obligated in the laws of Lashon Hara? And I said, what do you think I said? I said, of course they are. But not in all the details necessarily, but of course they are. Because I gave a whole lot of reasons. She didn't write them all up, so maybe I'll just spend just 2 or 3 minutes. Look, the Torah is instructions for living, okay? Non-Jews are obligated, not just in the 7. The 7 are 7 principles, okay? There's 7 principles. But anything that's logical, they also have to keep. But I look into my treasury. There's a encyclopedia of Talmud, and it brings down all the different mitzvahs for a Ben Noach, and it mentions that Ben Adam Lechavero, the mitzvahs, the commandments between man and man, there's an opinion that says they're obligated to keep. So Lashon Hara is certainly one of them. Now, there's also another opinion that in the laws of dinim means they have to set up courts. So you're going to have cases of libel, you're going to have cases of damages, and people can bring. It's up to the courts. So even if they're not 100% obligated like Jews, which they probably are not, in all the laws, Ben Adam Lechavero, but conceptually speaking they are, when it comes to a society, a just society, I can only imagine, right? They have the right to make whatever laws they want, but damages and spreading rumors that can damage somebody, that obviously is, you could take someone to court. Okay, so the court has to deal with these things. Okay, so that was, and then the other idea actually that the Vilna Gaon mentions, that the whole purpose of life is tikkun hamidot. That's what the whole Torah, even Rashi says, everyone says, that the Torah is the antidote for our Yetzer Hara. What, non-Jews don't have a Yetzer Hara? Non-Jews don't want to come to Hashem. There's positive mitzvahs, negative mitzvahs, but whatever it is, it's all about working on your character and refining. And that's what the mitzvahs do. The mitzvahs themselves do that. So yes, maybe there's different expectations between a non-Jew and a Jew. Let's leave it at that. There may be different expectations. But we already know, and you heard from me many times, the Rambam says clearly, and everyone agrees, that any mitzvah, could be maybe 2 of them that he doesn't agree with, but basically the other 600 and besides 606, let's say 604 mitzvahs, we're just going to take Shabbos and learning Torah and put them aside for a moment, that those 604 mitzvahs are optional, that a non-Jew certainly can and will get reward. And reward where? In this world and in the next world. So what greater thing? I'm not trying to tell anybody what they should do. I don't understand why anybody would say don't. Okay, but that's a whole other story. Why did I put Shabbos and learning Torah on the side? You'll have to listen to my other shirim for that. Okay, we're back in the Sfas Emes, where he said like this. Okay, so we have this obligation. When am I going to reach the actions, the character traits of my forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? That we were able, right? This is. We merited to have redemption, to get out of Egypt, and we were not on their level. Nobody was on the level of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? As a collective, we weren't. We were already down on in terms of levels, and yet we merited to get out, even though we were not on their level. Al zekativ. Now, regarding this, if you go to Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 8, and it's really the middle part of the verse, but the sound of my beloved, behold, he is coming, skipping over the mountains. That's the important part, jumping over the hills. Kol dodi hine zebo midaleg al haharim, skipping over the mountains. Who are the mountains? Throughout Chazal, the mountains are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are our mountains. And yet, God helped us fly over it, right? We didn't reach that level, right? And yet He helped us accomplish leaving this Egypt, leaving this bondage, leaving this horrible exile. How b'schut avos? This idea that in Song of Songs is about the merit of our forefathers. Shekrish Baruch Hu Herim Otam Liot Nidbakim Maseh Avos. That Hashem did what? That He raised us up to be clinging, to be cleaving to the actions of our fathers. Okay, so it wasn't through the hard work, it wasn't through the effort, it was, let's call it grace to a certain extent. Okay, we hadn't reached that level, and yet Hashem carried us. Don't be confused about this. Don't wonder too much. Because even more than this, look at Exodus chapter 19, verse 4. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, Hashem says, and how I bore you on eagles' wings. So what does it mean, bore you? He carried us. He carried us on eagle's wings, and I brought you to me. You know what it is about an eagle? That other birds, they carry in their claws, or whatever their paw, I don't know what they are, their feet, they'll carry their young. But the eagles will put them behind them. So God forbid, right, the archers, the enemy is going to shoot arrows, the mother or the father is going to protect the young. Okay, so this is just a side point, but it's important to know. But the last part of it, and I brought you to me, this is going to be also significant. So, Esa eschem al kanfei nesharim, I carried you on eagle's wings, the avei eschem elai, but I brought you to me, God says. This is very important. So, going back, he starts out with the latter part, I brought you to me. L'sha kala, now just think about this in a second. Not only does God bring us to Him, but even when we were in Egypt, and I call it punishment, but let's say the quota of the Egyptians was pushed to its limit. They raised the quota of the bricks that we had to produce, and they kept us from. They kept the straw. In other words, they said, "Go gather your own straw," and they upped the limit, which made it so much more difficult. But the Sfas Emet says, in a very limited time, a very short period of time, we were actually able to accomplish that. God gave us super strength in the exile. In a very short period of time, we were able to gather from the Chomer Levanim. We were able to produce the bricks that they required of us. And that is basically carrying us on the eagle's wings. He gave us, I call it grace if you want. He gave us the super ability to overcome, as the verse mentioned, and how I bore you on eagle's wings. Humase avos. This is the actions or the character traits of the forefathers, and through this, and because of that, God says, I brought you to me. Okay? So this was a fantastic idea to really bring home that the love that God has for us and the importance of sticking to our Masorah, to sticking to the Jewish tradition. It's only through the sages that have suffered, right, the Jewish people who have kept the tradition for all these years, that we have to have a tremendous amount of respect, right? And how easy it is to veer off the path and to make up and think we're so smart and invent new things. Even for a non-Jew, it's forbidden to invent a new religion. How much more so for a Jew? Stop inventing new religions. We have so much wisdom and insight and power. It's unbelievable. Why would we need to go anywhere else? Okay, so Tova actually asked an interesting question regarding the hyssop. What is there's special characteristic about the hyssop? I'm sure there is. I am just familiar with one particular idea, and that is in many of the rituals you need two things. You need, in terms of kapara and atonement, there was used a cedar, which is a very strong tree, and a hyssop, which is a very weak and low tree. Because basically the bottom line is, what we need to accomplish is called the middle road, meaning the golden mean. And the Rambam speaks about it a lot in terms of character traits. We shouldn't go to any extreme except when it comes to humility. Okay, so here you're only using the hyssop. So basically when it comes to the hyssop is a very low, I mean low, it's a bush. It's not a tall tree, it's not a tree at all. So this is very important in terms of the atonement, that we need to have humility. God does not want your offerings. It doesn't mean he told you have to bring them. He wants your heart. He wants your humility. He wants a broken spirit, a lowly spirit. Your offerings are, I'm going to say the word worthless. I don't know, I mean, I'm not God. But he himself said, you just bring them without your heart, I'm not interested. That's why the hyssop is used, to show that you need humility, that you need to have this broken spirit. I mean, just think about King David. I don't want to go into the whole story, but we all know. I mean, King David was the black sheep of the family. Do you understand that this caused his rise, his ability to connect with the Almighty, because he felt so despised? You know that his father, right, came from royalty, right? His father came from Yishai, who came, right, through Boaz and Ruth, right? The whole story of Shavuot, the book of Ruth. There was a discussion that was going back and forth through different generations, in the Sanhedrin even. Is a Moabite allowed to marry into the Jewish nation or not? It says in the Torah they're not. So why would there even be a discussion? Why would there be a discussion? It says a Moabite cannot marry into the Jewish nation. Because the tradition is only the men were not allowed, but the women were. And Ruth married, she was a Moabite, and she married Boaz. So she converted, and she was allowed to. Okay, but generations went by. We're talking 2 or 3 generations. There was a discussion back and forth. Okay, so Boaz felt and knew that it was permissible. But then later, the Sanhedrin changed its mind. Okay, they were in doubt. And Yishai, being a product of a Moabite experience, felt maybe I shouldn't be marrying into the Jewish people. So he left his wife physically, meaning he was still married to her, but he did not engage in sexual relations. And he made up with his handmaid, right? He had a shifcha who was in the house. And he said, I'll sleep with you. I'm worthy of sleeping with you, but not with my Jewish wife. Okay? And the handmaid, she said, I'm not going for this, okay? So she told the wife, she told Yishai's wife, and they made a plan, just like, Rachel and Leah. Okay? When your husband comes to me, you'll be in my stead. So that's basically what happened. And she got pregnant. And what did Yishai think? How did my wife get pregnant? I've been sleeping with the handmaid. So this kid is a mamzer. He's not. It's not out of wedlock, but he is a black sheep. Let's say, right? He is a blemish. And even when Samuel comes to anoint King David, he says, "Bring me all your sons." Yishai didn't think he was his own son for all those years, but Dovid knew the truth. His mother told him the truth. Okay, so he was this, you can imagine what this man, this boy, felt his whole life, that the whole world looks at me like I'm a black sheep. And he was able to reach out and to the highest of highs in a relationship with God because of his broken spirit, okay? So you asked about the hyssop. That's all I can relate to you. I don't know if that answers your question, Tova, but we'll go on, Bezrat Hashem, to the next paragraph. Okay, so now we're on paragraph 14. And it starts like this. B'nei Yisrael mitzad atzman nimshachim acher Shem Yisbarach. That the Jewish people, from an aspect within themselves, from something internally, is nimshachim. This word, nimshach, means to pull, to draw forth, to pull. After Hashem. There's something internally, like a compass, right? The Jewish people are drawn towards Hashem. Rak shegalut v'ava misoteret. However, this is a conceptual concept. It's a concept that he says like this: it's only that the concept of exile and love are what? Are incompatible. How can exile and love be intertwined? They seem to be totally opposite and incompatible. However, miyad shenigalu nitaru koach ahavatam alav. However, when they are redeemed, you know what happens? There's an awakening of the power or the ability for this love, this tremendous love. Now that doesn't mean that there's no love during the exile. It's just seemingly incompatible. So one of the first things I brought, he did not, the Sfas Emes did not bring this, but I thought it was important to bring. The first source in Exodus chapter 12 verse 21, based on the word nimshach, okay, because the word is used, mishcho. In chapter 12 verse 21 in Exodus, it says, Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, draw forth or buy. You should buy a sheep for your families and slaughter it for the Passover sacrifice. So in Hebrew, mishchu ukechu, which you can mean it's to pull. God was actually telling them, pull away and then take. What is the pulling away and then taking? Because as I mentioned, that the sheep, which is represented by Aries, which is the month in which we left Egypt during the full moon, was represented by their deity, their false idol. Okay, so the Jewish people, we know we were idol worshippers while we were in Egypt. Okay, we descended to a level of idol worshiping, and the first thing we needed to do was to pull away from these idols. We had to pull away from them, and then take them without any bias. That's what I wanted to add, but he doesn't go there. He's saying like this. There's a medrash that says, Mishchu yedechem me'avodah zara, that they had to pull away their hands from avodah zara, from idol worship. Sheikasha lehem, it was not easy. It was very difficult for them. Lifrosh me'avodah zara. It wasn't easy for them. In fact, when God told them to do this, was on the 10th of this month, 4 days before they left Egypt. 5 days, however you want to look at it, right? We're talking about the 14th they slaughtered it, and they left on the 15th. But what did God say to them? Take it on the 10th. This day was Shabbos, and a miracle occurred. And not this coming Shabbos, but the following Shabbos is called Shabbos HaGadol, because of what we did on that Shabbos. I mentioned this a few weeks ago about the power of Shabbos, but it's also the power of the weekday, the power of the 6 days that goes into Shabbos, makes the Shabbos, and whatever happens on Shabbos brings power into the weekday. That's why there's 2 ways to look at the week. The week begins with Sunday and ends with Shabbos. Fine, there's a build-up. But also Shabbos is the pinnacle, is the high point of the week. You have 3 days before Shabbos, 3 days after Shabbos, just like the menorah in the temple. So you have you have 3 days before, 3 days after. That's why Havdalah, one can make Havdalah up until, I think it's Tuesday at sunset. That's called the third day, because the influence of Shabbos still holds. There's still a holding. It's like there's a build-up, a crescendo, Shabbos, and then a letdown, if that's the terminology you want to use. But basically, there's 2 ways to look at Shabbos. So in the meantime, we are discussing this idea that what you do on Shabbos, that's why you should have, of course, full of joy and peace and harmony in the house, and hopefully that brings, it extends into the week. Okay? What you do during the 6 days to prepare will help Shabbos, and then Shabbos itself will extend into the week. Okay, so he says, immediately after, it was very difficult for us to separate ourselves from the idol worship. What does it say? Look at chapter 12, verse 39. It says, they baked the dough that they had taken out of Egypt as unleavened cakes, for it had not leavened, for they were driven out of Egypt, and they could not tarry, and this is the important part, and also they had not made provisions for themselves. What does that mean? They didn't make provisions for themselves. Now this is called Shevach LiYisrael. This is a praise of God to the Jewish people, that they didn't take anything else with them. Imagine, I don't know what all this panic is of taking all this toilet paper and Prel and whatever's going on in the world. But when God says, move, you move, right? Stay home, stay home. Here, he said, go out of Egypt, quickly. Look at Rashi. And what does it mean they had not made provisions for themselves? Meaning they didn't take anything else for the trip. And this verse tells of Israel's praise. Namely, they didn't say, this is what they didn't say. Oh, how are we going to go out into the desert without toilet paper? How are we going to go out into the desert without a fan? I don't know, whatever else you need. Instead, they believed and they left. This is why it states explicitly in the prophets, and this is going to the next source, Jeremiah 2:2, chapter 2, verse 2. But basically it says like this, I remembered to you the love and kindness of your youth, the love of your nuptials. What does that mean? There was a love and kindness of our youth. Look at Rashi on that verse. Were you to return to me, I would desire to have mercy on you. For I remember the love and kindness of your youth, and the love of the nuptials of your wedding canopy, when I brought you into the wedding canopy. Because if you look at the rest of the verse, it says, Ahavas kilotayich, which is this idea of the love of the wedding canopy. They translate it as the love of your nuptials. Fine. So what is that? Now what was the love and kindness of your youth? You followed my messengers. You followed Aaron and Moshe and Aaron from an inhabited land, meaning where there was toilet paper and water and all the luxuries. You followed them from an inhabited land to the desert without any provisions for the way, since you believed in me. We're going to get into this whole idea of Amunah shortly, but that's where we're at now, explaining the love of the youth when we were still in Egypt and we were willing to leave without our provisions on our back. So what is the Sfas Emes? Yesh lo mizeh Shivchan shel b'nei Yisrael. This is all about praising the Jewish people. She'etzem b'nei Yisrael le'olam lehitmashech acher haboy yisbrach. Remember, we're talking about, it's like in the DNA, that the Jews are drawn towards God. Rach hachoshek yikase arts. But the darkness covers the face of the earth. But that's called the exile. But guess what? V'tekaf barega achas. Immediately, in one moment, in one swift second, shinaglu miyad. As soon as they're redeemed, immediately nit'orer koach ahavat l'Hashem yisbrach. This is awakened once again. This love that's always been there becomes uncovered. Right? It will quickly be awakened. And I think we see it today, right? In the long exile for 2,000 years, I know that it was there. Jews loved and desired to come to Eretz Yisrael, but it was impossible. It wasn't on the forefront of their mind as a reality. It was only a dream, right? And now we have almost half the Jews in the last 70 years have come back to the land of Israel, and most of them came with love, right? Not all of them came with the towels between their legs running away from anti-Semitism, although I'm sure that happened. But once they got here, they fell in love with the land and with the God of Israel. It was awakened. Okay, so then look at Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 4. As we're talking about this idea of nimshoch, of drawing towards God, God even says, draw me, we will run after you. The king brought me into his chambers. We will rejoice and be glad in you. We will recall your love, more fragrant than wine. They have loved you sincerely. So look at the Hebrew words. Mashkeni, the word limshoch, mashkeni, draw me, acharecha, after you, v'nirutza. Nirutza, and we will run. Shegam begalut, ahavat misoteret. So it's true. Also in the exile, this love is hidden, is seeming contradictory. It's seeming like it's not possible to exist. Mekom mekom, ayde remez muat. I think this is very interesting what's happening. When we see even the smallest glimpse, a small hint of a redemption coming, wow. I think that's why there's so many religions today, right? You ever see The Life of Brian? I highly recommend it. It's quite a funny movie. But the Jews have this messianic, that's what we are, messianic tendency. We're waiting, we're looking, we're anticipating. I know I had this conversation with Stephen. That's what we are. We are messianic. That's what a Jew is. We're looking forward to the kingdom of Yehuda to return. Okay, so we're anticipating. But unfortunately, when we get lost and we're not knowledgeable and we emotionally disturbed, we create these religions, which I mentioned is forbidden, right? Who were the first Christians? Apparently, they say they were Jews. Who were the first Hindus? They were probably Abraham's 6 sons that went to the east, right? Who were the first Muslims? I have no idea, but from what I hear, Muhammad studied Judaism and based a lot of his religion on Judaism. Okay, and he probably had disciples that he threatened with a sword to come along on his route. Okay, so he said like this: "Mekom mekom, ayde remez ma'at, even to the slightest hint, sheyimshoch otanu habor yisbrach, we will follow after Hashem." Anu muchanim lirutz, and we're actually prepared to what? To run. Acharav b'kolev, with our entire heart. So that's why all these false messiahs are very dangerous. They're very enticing. But it's important that the Jews have always held strong. We need absolute proof, like the Rambam mentions, the rebuilding of the temple, the ingathering, the exiles, the fighting the wars, to bring the Jews back, the exiles and the religion, okay, not the opposite. The opposite just doesn't fall, right? Doesn't go. You know, I don't want to go into the whole thing, but we all know what we're talking about. Okay, so there's another verse that we're going to deal with now, and that you can find in Exodus chapter 12, verse 51. Right, it came to pass on that very day that the Lord took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt with their legions. Now, I don't think that's a great translation. I would say like this: Hotzi Hashem es bnei Israel. God took the people, the Jewish people, me'eretz Mitzrayim, al tzavotam, according to their legions, right? By way of, because what is the word tzava? Tzava is an army. As again, the seguda achas is one solid unit. As warriors, as an army for God. Okay, so what the clear car? You have to forgive me. The Sfas Emes says, "Lihiyot mithapech berega echad miklal avdei paro," that we were able to turn around in just one moment from being miklal avdei paro, from being within the category or the general grouping of the slaves of Pharaoh. By the way, we were royal slaves. We did not belong to the individual Egyptians. We belonged to Pharaoh. Okay, I can go into why if you want to hear the source. When Yosef hoarded, when he saved Egypt from the famine by saving for 7 good years, when the first 2 years came about and people didn't have any food and they didn't have any money, They gave over. He took all their money the first year, And the second year they didn't have any money, so he took their property. They became serfs. All the Egyptians themselves became slaves to Pharaoh. And so we were working by the individual Egyptians, but they were slaves to Pharaoh. We were slaves to them. So we were slaves of slaves, but we're not really. We didn't really belong to them. We belonged to Pharaoh, because a slave, he doesn't own anything, right? When a slave picks something up he finds on the street, it belongs to his owner. So the fact that we were working by individual Egyptians, we were royal slaves to Pharaoh, basically. So we went out in one moment from being royal slaves to Pharaoh, lihikanes b'klal tzava Hashem, and we went all the way to becoming, I'll use the word slaves, he used the words army. We went into becoming the legions of God. Ve'eno davar katan. This is not a small matter. It's not a small matter. He's going to expound on this now. La'agid shivchan shel bnei Yisrael. And this all is to tell over the praise of the Jewish people. Ki etzem lavos bnei Yisrael, because the essence of the hearts of the Jewish people, eno mishtane, it never really changes. We believe even the most secular-looking Jew has a spark that goes all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's how great they were. That spark never dies. K'moshe Ketuv, listen to this. There's an analogy brought down. It's a famous analogy. I can just try to summarize it, but basically the mashal is Legibor Sha'amid Hakorav V'Zorik Behem Chatzim Chetzi Kalim Vehem Einam Kalim. Basically it's like this. So you got this hero, he's holding up this beam of a house, and if he lets go, the house is going to fall down. And the enemy is shooting him with arrows. The arrows are destroyed. They don't destroy him, and the beam is still hanging. The beam is still there because he's holding it up. And what happens, just like the arrows are disintegrated or eventually destroyed, so too the enemy who shot those arrows are destroyed, and yet the Gibor, the hero, is still holding up the beam. The beam is still there. This is all to understand that in the end, the Jew will always be victorious. Okay, that in the end, the beam, the faith of the Jew will carry him over. So he says, Kevan shehechin haboire es bnei Yisrael, since God prepared the Jewish people. V'chnisam be'elo malchus, and he entered us into these kingdoms, the exiles, as we started to say about Egypt and so forth. Botach yel libam, there's an assurance that their hearts, ki yachlo legibor negdam, will always be able to stand up against them and be more powerful. K'moshe ne'emar. Now this is an interesting verse. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 8. When the Most High gave nations their lot, V'hanachel elyon goyim, v'hafridu b'nei adam. So when he separated the sons of man, right? You had 70 nations. What did God do? He set up the boundaries of peoples according to the numbers of the children of Israel. Yatsev gvulot amim. The nations, they only have existence. Their borders of their countries, however you want to explain this, is lemismar b'nei Israel, is all according to. Now when we went down to Egypt, how many souls were there? There were 70 souls. It's true we started with 12, or we started with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then Jacob had 12 sons, Israel had 12 sons. And as a result, when we went down to Egypt, the Torah clearly says that there were 70 souls. So it's these 70 souls that entered Egypt. This is the representing the 70 nations. So somehow or another, we're talking about metaphysically, that this idea, he set up the boundaries. Even the 12, if you look at the zodiac, right? We've discussed many times the zodiac. There are 12 distinct months by the zodiac. These are also according to the 12 tribes. Okay, so we're not going to go into that tonight. That's a whole nother class. But the 70 nations are parallel to the 70 souls that went down into Egypt as called the children of Israel. And so what does the Sfas Emes end here with? He says, this is also similar to what God says to Moses. Look in Exodus chapter 3 verse 12. He said to him, For I will be with you. This is by the sneh, by the burning bush. I'm going to be with you, and this is a sign for you that it was I who sent you. When you take the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So in other words, they're standing on Har Sinai, but this is a year before the whole of Israel's there. This is just Moses alone. Okay, a year and a few months perhaps. So what's happening here? That God is saying you're gonna ta'avdun, you're gonna serve God on this mountain. So what is the bottom line? Perish shehit hafchu miyad limidrogotam hatova. That the Jewish people were not even worthy of serving God on this mountain, and yet God made it happen. He brought us out of Egypt. 50 days later, we were already standing on Mount Sinai. We were 49 levels of impurity. We were idol worshippers. We were. I don't want to keep on going and say what we were, but we weren't holding in a good place. We were nowhere near the madrega, near the level that we need to be on to receive the Torah. And yet Hashem brought us. We're talking about this whole idea of drawing us forth and carrying us and bringing us high. That is basically what this whole paragraph was about. That Hashem will carry us. Have no fear, right? All you have to do is do the work, right? Work on your character. Keep the mitzvahs, whoever you are, whatever mitzvahs you're required, and then some, right? That's this paragraph in a nutshell. Now, the last paragraph we're going to deal with today is B'kol Dor Yesh Yetziat Mitzrayim Lefi Inyan Ador. There's actually, for every single generation, there's going to be an exile and a redemption. Okay, there's going to be a redemption that relates to an actual leaving Egypt. And what does Egypt mean? Mitzrayim, the word Meitzar means a very tight, constricted place. Everybody in their life, everybody in their own life, personally, and every generation, will experience some type of tormenting, some type of tight, restricting place that they need to escape from. I don't mean escape in that sense of escape, but I mean redeeming. They need some redemption from. So this is for every generation. Kfi amuna ta'adam, according to the belief, the faith of a person, margizos, he's able to feel it and perceive it. V'yachal etzeis mimeitzar shelo, and he will be able to, based on that feeling, knowing of this amuna that God is there, he's able to escape from this tight, restricting place. Now, before we get into it, the fact that it happened to us, that we already were removed and released, is a good way to understand how it can happen again, right? So there's a amuna in the past. If it happened then, it can certainly happen again. Or, as we said also, it's in the DNA. But let's see what the Sefat Emes has to say. B'chol dor v'dor, it says in the Haggadah actually, in each and every generation, B'chol dor v'dor, chayev adam liros es atzmo, a person is obligated to view himself, to perceive himself, ki'ilu hayotze mitzrayim, as if he personally left Egypt. When I say he, I mean he or she, right? Each person has to view themselves as if they personally left Egypt. Now is that a huge request? How hard is that? 3,300 years ago? I was there. I don't remember being there. How can I look at myself as if I left Egypt? As it says, "V'higadata livincha b'tzeischa mitzrayim li." You have to tell your son what? That God did this for me. Come on, this is the words the Torah is telling you to use. When your son asks you, right? It will be on. You shall tell that's the next one, right? It's in Exodus 13:8. You shall tell your son on that day, saying, because of this, the Lord did this for me. On the night of Pesach, when I went out of Egypt. When I went out of Egypt, we're telling our son, he knows we didn't leave Egypt. 3,300 years ago, you're only like 20 years old or 40 years old or somewhere in between. How is it that you're telling your son, the Lord did this for me when I went out of Egypt? This is a great question, right? The Torah tells us this is what we're supposed to tell our children. And yet, what is the real secret behind it? that we're actually, it's not a lie. It's the absolute truth. If you're able to have your own personal redemption. That's what it's all about, man. Listen to what he says. Right? Afterwards it says that he brought us out. God did bring us out. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 23. He brought us, we're telling our children, he brought us out. In order that what? He might give us the land, bring us and give us the land in which he swore to our forefathers. See, he brought us out. Nira ki ayedei amuna. It's because of our faith. I'm going to use that word amuna. I don't know if faith is the proper, it's because of our belief. Sheyesh Yetziat Mitzrayim l'kol dor v'dor. Because of our recognition that there is a opportunity to leave your own Egypt in every generation. Meaning your own personal being tormented, whether it's psychological, whether it's physical, whether it's spiritual, right? Or all the above, right? Or any one of them. Every generation, nitgalazeh. This will be revealed. The Maharal writes, Ki beklal haya kol echad b'yitzis Mitzrayim. That the truth is that every single one of us, our souls, were there. Now, even if you want to say, I don't know if you want to say this, but even if you come to say, I don't believe that, so guess what? Our family that was there was one single unit, right? At one point, right? And later on, even when we left and we stood at the mount and we made an oath to God that we would keep the Torah. So it's the same unit, basically, that left, that stood at the Mount Sinai. And Rashi says there, the ishachad belevachad, like a single unit. And we actually said we took the oath as a group. It wasn't an individual saying, I'm going to keep. Maybe when it comes to converts, they were individual souls from the individual nations that said, I want to keep the Torah. But as the Jewish people, it was a single unit. And there's no escape. That was a contract that was binding on every one of us, that if one of us doesn't keep it, we're all held responsible. We have to think of one unit. So anyway, so as a great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild, I'm also obligated to keep the Torah, and it's as if I left Egypt too. So either way you look at it, whether you think of your soul being there, or that you're part of the part of that group that left, and you're obligated to keep the Torah, okay, but either way you look at it, he says like this, the general rule is that each person was there, Rak chayev lirot ki'ilu yotze befrat. But the only obligation you really have, you're obligated to see as if you personally left. Okay? It's very important what he says. Yesh lomar, there's also to say that it's all through amuna, we call it faith. Niknas leklot l'toch haklal. It's through the faith that we enter into the general category. Right? If you don't have faith, you don't have any knowledge of this, then you're really outside the box. So with absolute certainty, it was the general group that left Egypt, the entire group, and it's from the very, I'm going to call it the Pintel Yid, it's from that soul spark of each individual that was there, each Jew, that's where there is this drawing forth of life, lekol ish Yisrael, towards every other Jew, rak ayedei amuna bo'in lezeh. It's all stemming from this point. That's why we have all these obligations. What do they say is the most important mitzvah of the Torah? Li'ahavta re'echa chamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself, because he is you, right? And obviously this is a very important lesson for the non-Jews as well, on whatever level they can understand this. After you see yourself as if you left, that it's well known, that you should know and you should believe that this proof, that this basically uses as a holy spark, or this illumination that each person has, you wouldn't have had it if you didn't leave Egypt. And because of that light, remember whatever light of Amunah you had back then, or that you have that it happened then, is going to take you and catapult you into your own personal redemption now. It's through the redemption that happened then that you see yourself that you truly went out. Okay, so we're talking about historically, but we're talking about realistically even now. Getting out of your own personal box, out of your own stranglehold, right? That there's light at the end of the tunnel. So too, when we say, this is in the Haggadah, this is number D, the last thing on 4. So when we tell over, and it could be this year, there are going to be many Jews who are going to be all by themselves, okay? And the instructions we have in the Haggadah is, even if we're all sages, all discerning, all elders, all knowledgeable about the Torah, it's a commandment upon us to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Meaning, even if we're alone, you hear this? You're sitting by yourself because you can't have any guests, right? It's against the law in this country, or in many countries right now, right? Perhaps to have guests, and you're sitting all by yourself. He says like this, that's what it means. Besipur Yetziat Mitzrayim afilu kulanu chachamim. You're going to tell over the story, even if you already know everything, you're very knowledgeable, right? You have all the head knowledge. Ki af shehu chacham dabuch laHashem. Even if you're wise and you're righteous, and you're clinging to Hashem, Chaim, Hashem who is alive, yesh lo leda. You should know. Ki everything that happened is because of the leaving of Egypt. Emet kain rak shetzarich levarer ze ayidei amunah. This is all comes down to faith, to belief, that in truth you need to clarify for yourself. This is all about not just the head, but getting it into the heart that you were redeemed and you could be redeemed again, or you were redeemed in this lifetime. This is what it's all about. It's not this dry ritual of just sitting on the night of eating a certain amount of matzahs or drinking a certain amount of wine or saying a certain amount of words. It's about truly experiencing this emunah that had taken you 3,300 years ago, in whatever experience you had, till the present day, and hopefully in your lifetime, you will have the merit to experience leaving Egypt, leaving your own life of being tormented. Zeh sipur lashon biru of the gilui mefureshes. The whole idea of sipur. Sipur means to tell over, is basically you're clarifying explicit revelation. So if you're clarifying an explicit revelation, it means that it's real. This faith is not just head faith. This is like your whole heart. Why? Keep the cold door. Every generation, Yesh Yitzit Mitzrayim, there is an exodus from Egypt, Lefi Inyan Ador, according to the needs of the generation. V'chol zeh haya b'shas Yitzit Mitzrayim. And all this was and took place originally at the time of Egypt, and it carries on and draws forth till this day. According to the faith of man, Kilu Yotze Nidgale Bechinazu Umargesh Mitzit Mitzrayim, as if he went out and it was revealed through this aspect of a feeling. He's margish, he actually feels the leaving of Egypt. That right now, Yochel it says, Kol echad mimeitzar shalo, that each person is able to get out of his own constricted place. You're looking for freedom. And I'll reveal something for anybody who's already now at this point, listen to this whole tape. A person who went through drug addiction or any other type of addiction, they went through bondage and they want to be released from bondage, they say there's the 12 steps. And I'm going to tell you, I know they work, but they're all based on Torah principles. The group that started Alcoholics Anonymous, Dr. Bob, Bill Wilson, and the different groups that they were involved with, they were Bible thumpers. They were guys that they didn't have the big book until 1939, okay? And yet the group started in 1934. So what do you think they had from 1934 to 1939? What group do you think they came from? They came from, I'll use the word, Christian groups, born again, fundamentalists. But you know what? It was all based on Bible concepts. And I mean Old Testament, if I can use that term, Bible concepts. And a certain group that I was personally involved in my own personal recovery, okay, they used the secrets of the ancient Israelites, how they were redeemed from bondage, as the secret of recovery from addiction. Okay, so if anybody's interested in hearing more, they can write me an email. I'm happy to answer it. It's aarondovid@yiboneh.com, AARONDOVID @yiboneh.com. Anyway, we've been happy to hear you. So I want to wish everyone a Hag Kosher Smech. I hope this was instructive. I mentioned in the beginning, you can go and listen to the first part. Everything is in the description box below. I wish you a great Shabbos. Not this Shabbos. I do wish you a good Shabbos this Shabbos, but the following Shabbos is called Shabbos HaGadol. The power and the exercise we did in taking the goat, the sheep, and moving away from idol worship, that's what catapulted us into being able to be redeemed in the week. This is the proof that the power of Shabbos has power that goes into the week. It was only because we did God's instructions, we did what He told us to do, that we were redeemed. So with that, I bless you to just go and continue to grow from strength to strength. And again, refuah shalema to the whole world. And may we come out on the other side of this particular dilemma better and stronger people. Perhaps we'll have at least a stronger immune system because of this, and hopefully we'll have a stronger faith as well. Kol Tuv. Have a great life.
Okay. Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh.